this is John, a farmer from Iowa, who grows oats on his farm. And we heard about John's problem, or rather his desire to transition from conventional practices to regenerative practices because of all the environmental damage and the economic issues that come with intensive farming. And then we heard about the myriad of barriers that stand in the way of John making that transition, from a lack of access to land, to supply chain bottlenecks, to a lack of market demand, to a dearth of finance, etc. And what this story has told us is that social and environmental issues are complex systemic challenges, and they require a particular kind of change, deep, structural, and irreversible change, or what we call transformation. And such kind of change rarely happens as a result of a single project or a single company, but most often comes about through the combined effects of a great many things happening within a system with a degree of shared directionality, whether that's new technologies, new infrastructure, new regulations and policies, a shift in social norms and values, etc. And the actions that trigger those changes, the startups, the project developers, the NGOs that do the advocacy and consumer education work, etc., they tend to have different financing needs. Which means that the challenge of funding systems transformation comes down to one of matchmaking, of strategically mobilizing different forms of capital and then matching the right form of capital with the right kind of intervention at the right moment in time. The challenge, however, is that in today's world of purpose-driven finance, most investors operate from the standpoint of a single financial lever, a single asset class, a single type of instrument. And in their quest to deploy that capital for impact, and in this particular case, a vision of a sustainable and healthy food system, they scan the landscape of investable or fundable opportunities through the lens shaped by this one capital type. And so the venture capitalists see startups in alternative proteins and precision agriculture. The infrastructure investors see food processing facilities and agri-PV plants. The real estate investors see farmland and green buildings. The carbon market specialists see biochar projects. And the foundations see community centers, capacity building programs for farmers, awareness campaigns for consumers, etc. But everybody just sees the projects that fit their individual lens. And they miss all the other components, the connection between those components and the emergent properties of the system at large. And because they don't see those other things, they can't act on them. They can't invest across these different levers of change. And so as a result of that, they miss the opportunity to bring about the synergies we talked about yesterday, the strategic synergies necessary to cause shifts in systems. Systemic investing is the capital deployment approach that acts on this insight, that gives us the lens to see how everything's connected and the methodologies to then mobilize and coordinate capital of diverse forms provisioned by different stakeholders interested in a particular type of change in a system. So, what exactly is systemic investing? It is essentially a capital deployment approach, one designed specifically for systems transformation. And you can think of it as sort of the next stage in the evolution of impact investing, strategic philanthropy, mission-driven public finance, etc. So you take these approaches, you sprinkle it with systems thinking, complex system science, mission-oriented innovation policy, you put it all into a juicer, you hit the start button, and what comes out is an essence we call systemic investing. And the ingredients of that essence also then tell you what the imperatives are with which capital needs to be deployed. But this is fundamental. So imperative number one, capital needs to be deployed strategically. And by that we mean guided by transformational intent, informed by a theory of change, and steeped in systemic intelligence. The second imperative is that capital needs to flow in an integrated fashion across the capital spectrum or the capital stack, depending on which mental model you prefer, in what we call multi-lever portfolios that do act on technology and policy and consumer perceptions and infrastructure assets, etc., which often then requires us to work in strategic collaborations across sectors. And then finally, capital needs to be deployed in context. Context really matters. Every system is unique. So we need to bound the systems. We need to be clear about what places and supply chains we're operating in. We need to work across the different system scales, the macro, the meso, and the micro. And we need to find ways of deploying capital with inclusiveness and participation from those affected. We spent quite a bit of time yesterday exploring the hallmarks of systemic investing, which are the 16 ideas, concepts, processes that make this approach to capital deployment distinctive from other forms of purpose-driven finance. We're going to look at how some of those can be woven together in practice. And we'll do that through a framework that we call the structure diagram. And here it is. It is one of the mothers of all systemic investment charts, but I'm going to walk you through how it's constructed. So the first step, obviously, for all people involved in this work is to decide to embark on a systemic investment program, whether you start it or you associate with it. And that means already you're working with a systems mindset. You have that recognition that you need new lenses and new frameworks to do this work. And it also means that you'll probably thought about where you want to be active, where you want your impact to happen. You have a sense of the system boundaries and the type of change that you're looking for within them. In the heart of your systemic investment program will sit what we call the strategic investment portfolio. So this is where you would locate those vehicles that we would most typically call investment vehicles. And it's really important that those vehicles are designed in a way that's fit for purpose. And sometimes that means a 220 GP-LP structure, and sometimes it means something different. What's important is that whatever design you choose is fit for the kind of challenge that you're trying to address. And then whether these vehicles are single asset class or multi-asset class and returnable capital only, or a blend between returnable and non-returnable, that's a structuring choice. A really important one, but one where you have some flexibility. Around the portfolio, but still within your investment program, sit other financial levers of change that you have in your program, particularly philanthropic vehicles or highly concessionary vehicles, but also other financial levers, whether that's tax incentives and subsidies if you have a government as part of your coalition, whether that's risk transfer mechanisms like insurance or advanced market commitments, if you have those type of stakeholders in the coalition. It doesn't really matter where you draw them in. The question is, how much agency does the coalition have over these? And that sort of determines where you draw them. But the point is that all of that is part of an investment architecture that is ideally informed by the system's actual financing needs. And this goes back to what we talked about yesterday, the directionality of this work, starting with the needs of the system and then working backwards to the question of how much capital of what kind deployed in which way. And you will know all of this because you've been doing quite a bit of systems analysis to arrive at the theory of transformation and identify the leverage points, so the places within the system where your action can lead to outsized impact. Now, the magic happens with these green arrows, and those are the synergies that you'll be able to create if the program is designed and developed in a deliberate manner. It's what we call combinatorial effects, and it is one of the key differentiators to thematic investing, because in systemic investing, your assets, your other activities, they are meant to amplify each other. both from a financial and an impact perspective. And it's also one of the most interesting entry points then to develop a learning and sense-making infrastructure to move toward a systemic way of measuring and possibly managing impact. Some of you might now be wondering, am I supposed to do this all within my organization, on my own? And the answer, of course, is no. Systemic investing is collaborative investing because no single organization has control over or agency over all of the financial instruments that are in play. So you don't have to do it all. And yes, you can, in fact, continue to specialize in your asset class or your financial instruments if you're really passionate about that. You don't have to become a multi-asset capital deployer, as long as what you're doing is joined up with what other people are doing. And that gets us to the question of coalitions and orchestration, which we also touched upon yesterday. Because in many contexts, you will find that you will need somebody to do the coordination work, to generate and share the systemic intelligence, to convene and translate among the different stakeholders, to design and structure the instruments that are missing, and to measure progress and hold people accountable. And this is what exactly what financial backbones are for. A new type of financial infrastructure sitting at this intersection between systems orchestration and capital deployment, where at the moment we see a gap, and a gap that leads to fragmented capital deployment, where really we should have joined up and interlocking investments happening. So by now, you should get a sense that systemic investing is quite different from traditional forms of purpose-driven finance. It does build on what has come before, and some instruments, some playbooks are still relevant. But it does advance them. It does represent a stage in the evolution from, for instance, a much higher ambition of impact, moving from improving a metric to transforming a system, where the source of that impact is not a single asset, a single project, a single company, but the combined effects of multiple assets within that investment architecture. Which means that the units of analysis and transaction moves one level up from the isolated asset to the strategic portfolio, which then also means that we're no longer going to operate with a single asset class or a single instrument type and a single investment stage, but actually through multi-capital, multi-stage investment architectures. And again, not everybody, but together as an ensemble within a particular system. And the way we make sense of success is no longer through an output metric, like an SDG, but changes in the structures and dynamics of the system. We believe this work is relevant in a great many contexts, across different capital types, socioeconomic contexts, system types, issue areas, levers of change, etc. And my hope is that all of you can locate yourself somewhere on this mind map. Whether that's a specific issue area or geographic context or asset class that you're most involved in. The invitation to you for the summit is to explore the territory in maybe a slightly weird but geographically appropriate metaphor. You're all cows, and this is the pasture. So I want you to roam around and go to this hill and that tree and see what's over there. Because this is what the summit is for. And although this is the third instance of it, we started at MIT in Boston, we took it to London last year, this year we're in Rio, we're still at the very beginning of this movement that we want to co-create with all of you. So I'm really glad you're part of it this time, this year, and I wish you good roaming, cows.